didn't go out there today.
Thank you for that. Let's see, we need to turn our microphones
Yeah,
on,
they
right?
have a mic on.
So you get a little green button from Terry. Shelley.
You keep busy.
Is that everybody that we have on right now?
Yeah.
We're supposed
Mary
I
Martha
can
has
say
it.
how much money like this.
Okay.
Turn down a ton of it.
Lori was on, is she still on?
Late May.
Yeah, she just got off her video.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, it's July started.
And is Heather on?
I have plenty more.
36
Okay, there's Heather.
positions.
I'm here. I just had my camera off.
That's fine.
I just pawned some.
I didn't even see your name, so I didn't know whether you were still there or not.
Yeah, I'm just waiting, working on emails.
Constant, huh? Well, we'll wait just a second longer and see if Mary Martha able to join. It's just 5 o'clock now, so. How's Lance? Good? You're muted. Oh, there you are.
There we go. I'm good. How are you guys?
I like that wall. Is that real or is that just a fake background?
No, that's a fake background.
All right.
Otherwise, you'd see my boring home office.
I was thinking you were pretty creative there and pretty artistic.
No, I wish that were the case. It's nothing compared to Jim's usually.
I tried to turn it on.
Shelby, is that speaking in tongues?
What?
Is that speaking in tongues or what?
Yeah.
Maybe I'll let him miss it.
Yeah, it's recovering.
You might be able
It's
to after the
recovering.
meeting. I just want to turn off the phone
It's the
right
Holy
now.
Spirit calling.
Huh?
It's the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
No, it won't do anything
I
without,
was trying to read some medical records.
unless I,
Your heart powered off.
And I even have them blown up on my screen.
Won't even turn it I can. I'll do my purse somewhere. We could probably find a hammer.
Really strong ones and some medium ones.
I hate that app. I've tried to get him to disable it. We can't disable it. It's really funny now because it's happening. I mean, it's funny because I can't do.
Yeah, what do you do with it?
I know. Something in there.
Something.
Put it in your bag or something.
But
But don't forget it.
If I don't forget it.
Don't forget it. Bite yourself a note, put a note on the top of your little tab there. So you don't have to do it.
Yeah, it said Bixby something.
Yeah, my Bixby isn't turned on. That's probably what it was saying.
Because we're real words, they're just really fast.
Exactly, but apparently people that cannot see can hear them.
I can read them.
Well, let's go ahead. Why don't we go ahead and start? Mary Martha can join us when she connects. Wanted to, have a work session. The plan is to, be done by 7 because I know a couple of people have some other obligations that they need to get to. As Kent and I talked about, kind of format for the work session tonight, we talked about, needing to go through some of the out-district information. Oh, here I have a message from Mary Martha. Let's see what she says. Sorry. She maybe is looking. Can you send me the link for the Zoom invite? Laura, can you do that, please? Sorry, can't type and Laura will send it. Well, wait just a second, since she'll be joining shortly.
My kids always try to talk to me while I'm trying to type and type.
I can't.
Do this.
I can only do one thing at a time, especially when it's thinking and typing and all that sort of stuff. get it sent?
I emailed and texted, so.
Okay, thank you very much. She should be coming.
Do you have the packages? You said you didn't mail them because they were gonna be here.
Laura's
Oh,
got
I'll
it. She'll get the
get
word list for you.
I just don't want to forget.
No, she won't.
Excuse me.
Excuse me. But that sounded good on the microphone. Sorry about that, everybody. Good. Well, is she, are you hearing from her, Laura? Not yet?
Yes, I have to go, I mean,
Good thing. Another gospel.
Well, we'll catch her up here. So as Kent and I talked about the, some of the information that we wanted to talk about tonight, we want to talk about the out district. We had a document put together at the June meeting that we were going to go through during work session, and people were just tired by the time we, got through work session and stuff. And so we want to spend a little bit of time for Kent to talk through the out district credit hour information. And Julie, I think that was your request about, what the, there's Mary Martha. Hi, Mary Martha. What the taxpayer support is based on the credit hours that come from students from out of Butler County. So we want to talk about that. We also have additional out-district information besides the out-district site information, just that handout. We want to dig into that a little bit further. Also, as we were working on that, discovered a couple of other things that are pertinent to that out-district site information. So we'll go through that. And then Kent and I thought it might be valuable to spend a little bit of time going through the supplemental information that's part of the budget booklet that you all have. And I had Laura make some photocopies of some of the back pages of that in case people didn't, have those booklets with them. But spend some time talking about that just a little bit and how that, relates to the fund balances and the cash reserve and all of that sort of stuff. And so I'm going to turn it over to Kent, I think, to start off with. So you can go through, Kent, your analysis of Kent and Kim. I think Kim Sherwood, worked on this a while ago, and Carrie Potter probably, but I'm going to turn it over to Kent and let Kent kind of go through the credit hour information, and then we'll see what kind of questions you have for that. And this information is all posted on SharePoint. It's in your SharePoint folders and stuff, along with the shelving desk for the copies of the leases for the out district sites. That stuff's all there too. Yep, you're muted, Kent.
Can you see my screen there? Is it being
Yep, we can
shared?
see it. Yep, we can see it.
Okay, and I might just say before I go into the explanation of this, that we have these topics that Dr. Kroll talked about, but sort of the overarching goal at the end of this is we want to make sure that you as trustees have the information that you need to make a decision next Tuesday. So within the time frame that we have, we want to make sure we get to that. So do you have this document in front of you, or can you just see it on my screen?
It's on the screen, Kent.
Okay, so so I guess you have this document at some place. If you don't have it with you, it's in SharePoint, or you can get to it. But I'll just walk through it. Last fall, I developed a document that showed the amount of taxes per credit hour that Butler County taxpayers pay for in-district credit hours. And I compared that with all the other colleges. And just for reference, I've included that. It's over here on the third page. And we were about the fifth or sixth lowest of the other colleges. So this was a comparison of us to other colleges on the amount of tax support for each in-district credit hour. So that's not, when we showed that again, and Trustee Winslow saw that, she asked me to create a report that would show the cost per credit hour paid by Butler County taxpayers for all out-of-county students. So I had to think a little bit what kind of analysis I would need to create to do that. And so this is what I came up with. I hope, and I think this will give that information. We'll talk through it and see. The methodology is shown here. I've spelled that out. And I think I can explain that best just by looking at the table here. So the methodology was to look at the total revenues of the college. I know we're talking about costs per credit hour, but that's really, I think, the cost to the constituents, which translates into the revenue that we receive. And so if you take the local tax support, which is the 15 million here, and then take the other associated revenues, and what this is the tuition and fees that are paid by in-district students, a portion of state aid that's allocated based on the in-district, out-district credit hour split. And then we have some other revenues, and I just did an allocation of those also. So these are basically the revenues that are associated with in-district hours. And this is for the year ended 2018. And I did that because the other analysis had been done on 2018, so I was able to use a lot of the same data. So if we take the in-district credit hours for that year and divide the total revenues that are associated with Butler County, we come up with $645 of revenue from in-district taxpayers and students for each credit hour. Then for the other credit hours, this would be the all the tuition and fees for other students, in-state, out-district students, out-state and international students, all the tuition and fees, and then the state aid that's associated with those out-district hours and an allocation of other revenues. And if you take that total revenue figure, divide it by the credit hours for all out-district students, all the students who are not Butler County students, you come up with those constituents paying $254 per credit hour. So I think it's probably not a surprise to anybody because of the taxes that Butler County constituents pay a considerably higher rate overall than out-district students. And the difference is about $390 per credit hour. So that's the sort of absolute that I came up with in this analysis based on Trustee Winslow's request. I did go ahead, I think it's important, especially for us administratively, to look at, to put this a little context or perspective with this. So I did look at this compared to other community colleges. So when you look at, I was able to get information on 16 of the other 18 colleges. And these are the Butler figures that I took from up above. And so it shows that we're lower than, if you look at this difference and saying the difference is, the additional that Butler County pays, if you look at that compared to other schools, we are the fourth lowest for this particular model this year. So I think that brings a little bit of context. You can all interpret it the way you choose. The one thing it said to me, probably just as a reiteration of what I think a lot of people realize, maybe not some people on KBOR, but I think most people realize that the state doesn't fund community colleges to the extent that we would like it. They put more of the burden back on the counties. We try and do a good job here at Butler, but in the absolute, the numbers are clear that Butler County constituents and students and taxpayers pay more per credit hour than other students. And that's about the summary of my report. I don't know, Dr. Krull, if you want to say anything before we ask for questions on that.
Well, one of the things that Kent and I talked about was that, when you look at the comparison to the other community colleges, the other thing that it shows, we believe, is that as an institution compared to the other institutions, we're pretty efficient in how those dollars are used because we're on the lower end of that group of community colleges. The other thing that I did this afternoon was go through and look at the enrollments of the other community colleges and compared their in-district and out-district to their total credit hours. And there's about five or six community colleges whose in-district student percentages are pretty high, about 40% or higher. Johnson County is really, really high, population base. Kansas City, Kansas, really high population base. So there's about 6 community colleges that have, 40% or higher of their student credit hours generated by their own in-county students. The rest of us are all below that. And there's about 10 of us that are all about, 25% or below that have credit hours generated by that percent of in-county students. Highland, I think, only has like less than 5% of their students come from their county. And so there's a lot of difference in those enrollments based on location within the state, location to urban area or being an urban area. And so, so I think that there are a lot of differences when it comes to all of that. I think the other thing Ken also brought up a good point, and you maybe have heard me say it before, the community college analysis of our funding model identifies very clearly that the community colleges are and KBOR agrees with it, we're about 45% funded at the level that we should be. So there's a huge gap in our funding that's not made up by the taxpayers, and it's not made up by the state and stuff like that. And so if we were funded at a level that was higher from the state, it'd be a little bit different scenario for all of us. So I don't know, Kent, anything else on your end?
No, I think that's, if there's questions or discussions by the board members, I'd turn it over to them, I think.
No, I have a question. I'm still looking for that 300 and some odd dollar number that you gave us a few months ago on a piece of paper in which we were compared to other colleges as far as what the taxpayer contribution was towards credit hours for college students in Butler County. And I remember that was a 300 some odd dollar number. Now, you did say earlier that it was 2018. So you're telling me that this is 2019 and it's $300 more?
No, Julie, if I could explain that, this is a little different analysis, and both years are 2018, but the analysis before is this number down here. And this is the taxes levied per in-district credit hour. So that's what this analysis was that we did before. What you asked me to do, and I did this in the best way I thought I could to fulfill this, is say the cost per credit hour by Butler County taxpayers for all out-of-county students. Well, you know, the other counties don't levy a tax, so I can't show that they pay a tax. You know, if you want me to take the tax levied and divide it over all the students, I don't know, you know, I don't know a better way to show what I think you're asking.
Okay,
This
well,
is, this is the number that he showed before, Julie, the 381 was
Right,
what
right,
he showed
I get
on that
that.
earlier
and
document.
what I was trying to compare it to is this is what the taxpayers of Butler County pay for Butler County students, but I was looking to see if they paid the same amount of money for out of district or out of county students as well. That's
Yeah.
the numbers I was trying to compare to.
Yeah, I really didn't think that was, I didn't know a way to do that because this takes all of the taxes levied and divides it by the credit hours generated in Butler County. So that gives us the taxes levied for an in-district student. So I couldn't really take the taxes then and allocate that to out-district students in this type of scenario because it's all being allocated to in-district students. So if there's a different way of looking at this, you know, you and I may have to get together and talk through exactly how you would like to see that done.
Yeah, we're gonna have to do that.
This is Shelby. What helped me is I just took your in-district, out-of-district credit hours, which were 175,640, divided by the total taxes. I came up with $88 a credit hour, just blanket statement, you know, for all students everywhere, which I don't know if that means anything to anybody, but.
Yeah, I think that is another way to look. I did a similar analysis and came up something close to that. So I think it's the same kind of analysis. You sort of come back to the same conclusion that yes, Butler County pays more than out district.
Other questions? So that document's in SharePoint. You can get to that, the copies of that. Let's kind of go on then with you guys, and we'll talk about the out of county site analysis information that we put together. This is all in SharePoint too, but I wanted to give you a copy because I'm going to have Laura put another one up on the screen. So you've got this in front of you while we talk about the stuff that's on the screen. This is,
You'll have to do some info to get into the SharePoint.
I sent it today to you. Yeah, but you can't get into it part because you can't get into it. Yeah, I emailed it today. So you had this document before, the out of county site analysis. And one of the things that we discovered as we started to answer more of your questions, Shelby, that when, because we pull this information from a lot of different files and you know, have different people working on it. And one of the things that, as Heather was working on some of the additional information for your questions, what we discovered was that the revenue part of this was pulling in summer 18, fall 18, and spring 19, which is fiscal year. But when we were looking at the expenditures and the expenses, because it was on an academic year, we were looking at faculty salaries, it was pulling in fall 18, spring 19, and summer 19. And so they were off. And so the other document that you have like this, throw away, okay? This is the one now that's got the right analysis and everything is, I think Heather, is everything summer, fall, and spring? Is it the other way around?
It's fall, spring, summer.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so the other document that you have that looks like this, just toss it away. And so this one is correct. So let's look at what Shelby asked for, one of the leases, those are all in SharePoint. Some of the questions that he had were numbers of instructors and hours that they teach, equipment costs, total number of students, and a number from outside Butler County and the tuition they bring in, any kind of cost share agreements, costs for administrative and student support. That we just kind of paraphrase some of that stuff, but those were the general questions. And so let's look at the second block that you have on your sheet here that looks at McConnell Air Force Base and the Service Center, okay? And Heather's gonna jump in here and help me a little bit, and Lori may as well. So, and the block that's on your sheet shows this information from McConnell Air Force Base, the classes that we teach there, and then also the Service Center information all combined together. But I think it's important for you to understand, first of all, that the Service Center, which is on Rock Road, just north of McConnell Air Force Base entrance, is just an enrollment center. Years ago, we used to teach some classes out of there, but we don't any longer. So it's just an enrollment, testing, advising center. But they do enrollment out of that site for El Dorado campus, Andover, Rose Hill, McConnell, online, Boston Rec. And so it's not just, it doesn't just enroll students for one place. It's conveniently located, and you can see kind of in the middle of the page there that there's over $2 million in tuition and fees for Butler that were generated from March of 19 through March of 20 at that center, just short of 18,000 credit hours that were enrolled in all of those different sites. So it's a key location for us to generate enrollment and tuition and fees, even though we're not teaching classes out there. The lease is $21,660 annually. We pay $7,700 in utilities, and very little staff there. One full-time staff member, a couple of part-time people, but those folks float back and forth to McConnell Air Force Base also. They kind of help each other out depending upon the need. And you'll see that the administrative and student support personnel costs, we've reduced a 28-hour position at that service center in the last year. And so, there's no faculty cost there, there's no enrollment cost, but that's a key, that's a really important site for us because the enrollment piece and the testing and the assessment piece, as far as generating credit hours for the other sites and generating eventually tuition. So when you look at McConnell Air Force Base, then there's no lease cost there. We've been at McConnell 45 years. We're the only two-year college there. It's an MOU that we signed with the Department of Defense, and colleges and universities are essentially asked to be at McConnell. Lori was at Southwestern that lost their spot at McConnell this past year because they wanted to teach pretty much online classes, didn't they? Or they just weren't generating a lot of enrollment. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yeah.
And
And-
they were replaced by WSU.
That's right. Yeah. McConnell's a federal facility, and so it's not part of anybody's service area. It's right, it's obviously in the middle of Wichita, but it's not part of a Regents Institution service area because it's a federal facility. And so we don't have to have permission from anybody to be at McConnell except from the Department of Defense. They want us there. And then, the wing commander has to sign off and the education services officer and all that sort of stuff. So we pay utilities there, about $1,900. I'm going to have Lori talk about the faculty stuff here in just a second and explain that because McConnell is really unique. And Lori's going to talk about that a little bit. You can see very little equipment cost, last year, just short of $260 that we spent on equipment. We reduced the 28-hour position in the last year. And, the cost share essentially is that the MOU covers the use of space and utilities. And I think, Laura, if you scroll down, it shows the staffing then at McConnell. There's a full-time director and there's a full-time evening coordinator. And again, they float back and forth between Air Force Base and the Service Center. There are no faculty that are actually at McConnell full-time there aren't any faculty that teach solely at McConnell. And so Lori, talk a little bit about those faculty costs at McConnell and why they drive, they sort of drive the cost up at McConnell because of some specific language that's in the master agreement. So Lori's going to talk about that a little bit.
Okay, at McConnell, I want to point out that due to the requirements for the CCAF, we primarily offer general education courses. Those are courses like history, English comp, the algebras and the various math courses, history, gen psych, sociology. They are primarily gen ed type courses. When we have a full-time faculty member that picks up a class or two at McConnell Air Force Base, because of language in the master agreement that requires us to pay them multiple site pay, we have to assign that section or in the full-time faculty member's assignment as part of their base load. Because multiple site pay is only paid on a faculty member's base salary sections. So what happens is you end up with, for example, I'm going to use a physics instructor who has a 5 credit hour section of physics. And that's the only class in his assignment that's at McConnell. 5/30 or 1/6 of his base salary gets charged to McConnell. And we also pay multiple site pay on that section. So he may have overload at Andover and we pay overload at the 65 rate. But because it's part of the base salary, it will ultimately increase the cost of the faculty salaries accumulated towards that location. And that's because of language in the master agreement that requires us to maximize an instructor's pay, meaning putting multiple site pay on the sections that they are teaching at other campuses. So in some ways, it makes those numbers skewed a little bit. They could be teaching the next semester all of their assignment at one location and we would be paying no multiple site pay, and all of that salary would get charged to the location that they are assigned at. Does that make any sense to any of you? You have to kind of know how to make the master agreement apply to faculty assignments to get it. And it's hard the first time or two you hear it.
Lori, this is Forrest. So it's, even if an instructor is fully engaged at El Dorado or Andover, if they pick up a course at McConnell that would normally be considered overload, if it was taught in El Dorado or Andover, it's going to cost more because it's at McConnell.
Because it has to be part of their base 15 hours for that semester in order for it to get multiple site pay. So it's part of, it's a portion of their base salary, which is at a higher rate than overload pay is.
And that's been part of the master agreement for a long time, correct, Lori?
It's been part of the master agreement for long before I ever came to Butler, and that's 28 years ago.
Lori, this, I don't mean to catch you off. We didn't ask this ahead of time, but do we have any faculty that teach dedicated at McConnell, or are they all faculty that are teaching other places and just pick up a course or two down there?
We used to have a math physics instructor that was assigned totally to McConnell, and a biology instructor and an English instructor. But as those assignments, as we had 2 of those folks, we needed them at other locations. So they are no longer assigned just to staff McConnell. And the math physics person retired. And when we replaced that position, we did not put them at McConnell full time.
Do we have the ability to put adjuncts down there, or do full-time
We do.
faculty?
We do. But there's some disciplines that it is extremely hard to find adjuncts, and physics is a great example of that because we have a really, really hard time finding adjuncts with a master's degree in physics willing to teach for $665 a credit hour. It's a little easier in the behavioral sciences and history, but in some of the math and science areas, it's tough. And then, you know, if faculty choose to have overload and they happen to pick up a section at McConnell, their overload section is charged, if they're mostly teaching at Andover, it gets charged to Andover because we have to do that multiple site pay. If you look at the big picture of the cumulative cost of instruction to the college, the bottom line doesn't change. It just changes where the beans get loaded as far as the site goes. The faculty member doesn't see any difference in their total bottom line in their paycheck. It's just how it gets charged. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
How it gets assigned in our system.
Lori,
Yes.
so at McConnell, this is what I'm hearing is that the classes are very small. Sometimes we'll go ahead and have a class of 3 students. To me, that's not financially feasible. So do we have a limit of what or how many students can be in a class?
Sometimes, yes, we have let classes go smaller than that, but there's a variety of reasons for that. When we have small classes, we will look up the students enrolled to see if they are active duty military, and if they are close to graduating with their CCAF or with a Butler degree, we'll maybe make a decision to keep that section. We also will pair McConnell classes at times with a Flint Hills class. And so it'll have basically a twin section, and we will Zoom that McConnell class out to the Flint Hills so we can pick up a few more students, but they're listed in a Flint Hills section, but that instructor will Zoom it out to Flint Hills. So it's a little bit misleading just to look at the enrollments only in the McConnell sections, because there's a lot of, I mean, you have to know this one's paired with a Flint Hills section, or this one's paired with an Andover section, and that instructor's teaching both sections, but only getting paid for one section because we're looking at it as a combined enrollment for both sections.
So if you do combined sections, what's been the smallest student population for a class?
Overall, because if we're combining sections, we're going to look at enrollments in both.
Just at McConnell.
Well,
But if you do a combined one with the Flint Hills or whatever, what's the smallest student number?
well, I would have to look, but I would say there's times maybe when 3 or 4 students because of the need of the students. If they're close to graduation and we don't have another section that will fit for them. I mean, we're trying to honor that contract we have with Department of Defense. So there's a lot of variables that go into that, but yes, there are times when we have classes that maybe have 3 or 4 students in them. We don't like to do that, and we really work hard to try to figure out how to make it work. And I'm going to give you an example of a discussion I had with emails today with Erica, Heather, and Shannon Covert. We have a class at McConnell right now that has 3 students in it. It's a physics class. We have a physics class in El Dorado at exactly the same time. So we made the decision today to cancel that class at McConnell and try to keep those students engaged and have the instructor that's at El Dorado teach those students, but he's going to do it remotely. So we won't see those 3 students in a section at McConnell because we'll move them into the El Dorado section, but we wouldn't have been able to do that had we not had another section and the instructor was willing to go above the 24 students he already had. So there's a lot of nuances happening, and we're working to minimize the cost to the college overall.
Mm-hmm.
But every single section is looked at individually to try to find solutions.
Thank you.
Shannon Covert was busy with all the emails we had with discussion today on that, and that's not unusual.
Thanks, Lori.
Hey, Laurie,
And so, go ahead.
this is Shelby Smith.
Hi, Shelby.
On most of the gen ed courses and stuff, are they also taught, you know, for instance, in Andover?
Sometimes. The one thing at McConnell that has been there that we haven't had at Andover is we've not had a physics lab until this fall at Andover. So physics, we're seeing some enrollments, some movement from McConnell, I think, over to Andover, because for years and years and years, we have never had a physics lab at Andover. And those physics courses, is provided they're not international students, students could go to McConnell and pick that up rather than going clear to El Dorado.
I was just curious, you know, if it's possible, I mean, could the soldiers drive to Andover? It's not very far. Could we give them a scholarship or do something along those lines? It seems real cost prohibitive to do it on base if they could just drive, you know, 15. If that's plausible.
Some of them won't do that because I was on active duty and my husband was stationed at McConnell. Some of them are going to go right over at 4:30, right after they get off work, and take a class with us. Some won't drive to Andover. Some may.
Some of them are also taking time. I mean, they have certain days off. They're working on base and serving on base, and so they have certain times and certain days off where they wouldn't necessarily be able to get to Andover, but they are able to walk into the Dole Center and take classes with us on base.
Yeah, there's a significant number of airmen that live in the residence halls on base, and they oftentimes don't have transportation.
Lori, don't some of them also, or Heather, have to be within a certain time frame, like within a few minutes of their
Yes.
As well, in case they get called to duty? That's another barrier that they have sometimes, that they can't leave base when they're on duty, right?
Yeah, that is true.
Okay.
I guess another question, what if we stepped away on base? Would Wichita State just fill in?
Yes, they would. I would like to point out that on the document that's up on the screen, if you look at that document, the full-time salaries of $183,317, and that includes multiple site pay and overload, and then base salaries that are captured at McConnell Air Force Base. If we were to walk away from that site, that $183,317 would just get reallocated to another location, because those are full-time faculty salaries in primarily gen ed departments. And so while you might think that you're going to save those dollars, you won't, because of the master agreement. Those faculty will just be reassigned to other locations. So that portion of the total bill at McConnell would not be a savings.
So Lori, it looks like we've got total expenses here of $672,500. And I know about 105 of that is the service center. So if we take that out, we're looking at total expenses unique to McConnell of about, call it 570, give or take. If only 180 of that is faculty salary, what's the rest of the expense load coming from?
Well, there's another sheet that, can we put that other sheet up on the screen, Dr. Kroll?
I think it's the one that they have in front of them.
Okay, well, okay, let me get it open on my screen then. Sorry.
I think I emailed it to you, didn't I?
You did. I've just got to find it on my computer. Sorry.
I just see a total expense number. I don't see it broken down at all. I'm missing something.
No, it's not. The 672,510.
Okay.
Yeah, no, and 105 of that is for the service center. So if you take that away, you're right. If you look at just McConnell Air Force Base only at the very bottom, revenues under expenses is $196,492. Okay.
Yes, that is what I'm talking about.
Right, and so 183,000 of that, in part, is um,
Full-time faculty salaries that if you closed McConnell would not go away. It would just get charged to another location.
I understand that. I just, for a place that we don't pay anything to lease, I don't understand how we're spending $400,000 in expenses there. And I'm just ballpark numbers. But I mean, I see 2,000 of utilities. I would have thought the vast majority of our expense load with no lease would be faculty. And it sounds like there's a lot of money going somewhere that's not faculty.
well, there are, I mean, it is faculty salaries. It is, because you see $280,000 in faculty salaries. 183,000 of that is full-time faculty, but the rest of it is adjunct faculty. There's a number of adjunct faculty that teach there as well.
Okay, when she 180,000
Yeah.
faculty salary, she was.
That's just a portion of that.
Okay.
Almost $280,000 is faculty salaries that, because there's adjunct faculty that teach at McConnell as well. Okay?
Does that make sense?
Well, it does. I guess there's still $200,000 roughly of expenses. What they're-
For no lease, no utilities, no equipment, it seems really high.
Well, we can have Kim Sherwood can dig back through all of that.
And this would be great if we had that and this physically, maybe. or-
They're in your SharePoint, yeah, they're in SharePoint.
I know, but
Well,
I'll have to print that off.
And I can't
I'm
get
sorry.
to mine.
So I'm sorry, I thought it'd be easier for you to have this in front of you and to look at that. So we'll dig through the expenses and look through the rest of that for you.
I have a question. That is what, can we separate the Air Force Base from the service?
It is,
This is what this is.
it's separated out. The 104,773 at the very bottom is the expense attributed to the service center. Okay, it's at the very bottom of the second block there.
Gotcha.
Yep. So
I talk about moving faculty positions, but surely in the master agreement, there's a reduction in force statement. If we got declining enrollment and we don't offer classes somewhere, we don't have to keep everybody on staff.
it's the adjuncts that go first, the adjunct faculty that you, and so that doesn't always save you a lot of money, you know, when they're getting paid $650 a credit hour. It's the adjunct faculty that you have to eliminate first according to the master agreement.
My thoughts are, and I agree with Shelby and I agree with Forrest, that it sure seems like there's an awful lot of money that's invested into running McConnell Air Force Base operation. I understand the service center has great value to it. Its cost isn't near as much. It just seems like it costs a lot of money to help the military out there. It's really not in our service center and our service area. It's just, we have with the government. I'd be interested to see some more breakdown.
I can get that for
Just
you.
exactly what those costs are specifically out of McConnell. And I'll be honest with everybody on the board, you, Kim, I have great concerns about McConnell if they can go over WSU so they're not being robbed of an opportunity to have an education directly on the base. I don't know about driving down or whatever, but I'm just concerned about the expense.
I understand that.
Well,
I understand
would
that.
the
I think
government
it's
possibly-
important to,
There's also advising costs at McConnell. That's about a little over $108,000 for advising. There's part-time faculty instruction is a little over $77,000 for the faculty portion. So,
Lori, it looks like we may have lost the boardroom feed.
oh no.
no, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Oh, okay.
Okay, we just couldn't hear you.
You can't hear me?
No, you're good.
Okay.
Heather, this is Lance. I can't hear anybody in the boardroom either. I don't know if they can hear us or not.
It looks like it's reloading again.
Yep, it's circling on mine.
And do you know, are there a certain number of advisors that are dedicated to a McConnell, and that's the dollar amount that she's talking about?
They're at the service center, they go back and forth between the service center and the Air Force Base. And you'll see, you saw on the sheet, the service center has one full-time staff, part-time staff, one part-time staff that assists at McConnell, and then down below, at McConnell Air Force Base, we have one full-time director and we have one full-time evening coordinator. But they float back and forth between the base and service center. So not heavy staffing.
Is their compensation then split between the amount that's allocated to the service center and the amount that's allocated to McConnell?
I think what's allocated to McConnell is the one full-time director and the evening coordinator. And then the staff that are listed up there are the ones that are allocated to the service center. Okay.
I know it's being.
Are we getting reconnected?
I know it's being a super pain on my email and asking for the whole 9 yards and all that. That's kind of why I do it, just to be like, where is that? Maybe we can find it and pick it up.
We can look for it. I think we're not live streaming right at the moment, so we probably want to make sure our discussion,
Oh, for sure.
we wait just a little bit till we get hooked back up again. I'll shoot Lori a text message. Did you send her one? Yeah, we're trying out. Put a chat.
Noodles, yeah.
Great. It's perfect.
1 gram of sugar and how much fat do you have in it?
We try to spoil it.
Okay, I believe we should
Saturated
it back.
You know, I tore that part off.
Oh, did you?
Not intentionally.
I think you can light those on fire probably. In the
Well, that
Yeah.
I'm sure. It was one of the worst, 27%.
Oh, well, that's,
Still not that bad.
okay. No, not if you think
Not
50%, not when you think 50% is in the right one.
Are they hearing us?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Okay, so sounds like we need to go back through, we'll go back through. Oh, Lori, the question was the advising cost. And that comes out of this, so explain that just a little bit. I think Shelby had a question about that $108,000 in advising costs.
Well, we have part-time advising assigned to McConnell. I think the document that you can see here just pulled out some of the highlights. I think Forrest had a question about, well, how do we get to 572,000 if 279 is faculty salaries and there's a portion of the site director and those others, but there's roughly $109,000 that is part-time advising staff, and sometimes those staff are, utilized to help Rose Hill, and but they get charged to help or charged to the McConnell list.
Are those advisors, Lori, advisors that are based out of El Dorado and Andover that float down to McConnell, and so that cost gets charged to McConnell?
Well, we have advising staff that primarily stays at McConnell, so those are the ones that are probably charged to the 560 account. Jessica might be better able to answer that, or Bill.
We have 3 advisors.
Okay.
1 is on base and 2 are officed in the service center.
Okay. So,
and I apologize for not listing that here. Those actually, like Lori said, those actually fall under enrollment management. And so I didn't list them as our staff, but they are there. So I should have added that, and I apologize for that.
Okay. We can get a more comprehensive accounting of that.
I'd like to see that breakdown.
Okay.
More detail. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. Let's go on.
Can I ask one more question?
Oh, yeah.
I know when this came up before, there was a mention that our enrollment
dropped noticeably when there was a new education service officer that came on post.
And a new wing commander.
Do we expect that to change when those folks rotate out? Or, I mean, are we hoping, or do we really have a realistic expectation it's gonna change?
The wing commander has changed out in the last year, and he's a friend of Butler, and is anxious to look for ways for us to teach, and some of this goes to the fact that some of those folks can't leave their stations and be too far away, and the Dole Center is too far away from some of the people that are on the line. And so he's been looking for ways for us to have some classroom space in those locations where they're actually located to generate some additional credit hours and enrollment. I think Lori, the education service officer, has been there for a while. I don't know whether he will continue on. He's one of those guys that really believes in face-to-face classes rather than online kinds of things, and really pushes the face-to-face enrollments. And so I don't know anything about his longevity there or anything, but we certainly have a new wing commander that's pretty proactive in trying to look for ways to engage their airmen and airwomen in more classes. The other thing that impacted this is with the prior wing commander, they eliminated all ability to recruit and to advertise your classes, to really try and get out and promote. None of the institutions could. And that had an impact on everybody because the only way you could really do it was kind of word of mouth, and you'd have your flyers out and stuff like that, and people would come past and pick them up, or somebody that was in a class could, tell their colleagues about it. But
Has that changed?
that has changed with the new wing commander as well. So
it takes time to rebuild that awareness of what is available on base. And so I know Erica has worked really hard to get out to the various squadrons, do presentations, and really market our programs. And so but again, that just takes time, because we've had probably 10 years where we haven't been able to really market and do what we used to do. When I first started at Butler, those classes were full or had a much higher average class size than they have in the last, 5, 6, 7 years.
Lori, I don't know if you could correct me if I'm wrong. I asked earlier if we stepped away, you said Wichita State would step in. If that's the case, would the soldiers still be served on base? They just wouldn't be served by us? Is that a fair statement?
Well, yes, that's a fair statement, but at the same time, it would cost the soldiers significantly more, particularly if they don't have, if there's a limit on tuition assistance and that kind of thing.
I believe they would also bring in another 2-year option. So they have, WSU is already on base as the 4-year option undergrad. And so Butler is the 2-year option. And so I think that they would probably look for another 2-year option.
The feedback I've got over the years is they have been very pleased with Butler. We are a school of integrity and service, and that has worked well for the military and military dependents that have taken classes through us. And so that long 45-year partnership has withstood the test of time because of our commitment to serving those military.
I get that, but say the last 5, 7 years, what has our commitment cost us to be there? Like, we just, shut down Educare because it cost us about the same per month over the last 10 years. It seems like McConnell may be about the same, and doesn't serve anybody that lives in our community. I know it's good.
Well, but if you've lost 200,000 there, remember, if you cut that location, 183,000 of that loss is just going to get reallocated to another site, because that's full-time faculty salaries. And there is the potential to close that gap if we can increase enrollments through promoting our programs and increasing the credit hours generated by that location with some of the
So
restrictions.
what happened to our educator teachers and staff? Are they just reallocated around campus?
What do you mean educator staff? I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Educators, teachers and staff, is that a different type of teacher and staff than McConnell, or?
Yeah, they were,
They're not covered by that.
they are covered by the master agreement, yeah. The other thing.
Educator staff were early childhood.
Yeah, the other thing you lose at McConnell if we walk away is that state aid allocation, so you lose about $200,000 in state aid. Because that doesn't go anywhere else, it's just attributed to those credit hours that are generated at McConnell, so. We'll work on the expenses. Let's look at a couple of the other things on here. Go back up to Boston Rec, will you? I think that was, let's see, is that the next one down? That's the top of your sheet here. Let's look at Boston Rec. So you'll see with Boston Rec and the Flint Hills, both of those generate revenue over expenses. The revenues are split out, so you see the tuition and fees for in county and out of county and all of that sort of stuff. If we look at there's a lease cost there, utility cost. The faculty there taught 70 sections. Their salaries are $165,000. There's 2 full-time faculty and 19 adjunct. And you'll see enrollment-wise, 538 enrollments. And then this out-of-county, in-county information that's on this other sheet in front of you. About $28,000 in equipment purchases during 2019. And Heather, was that also equipment and supplies and those kinds of things that they used for class?
Yes, it included the lab, so all of their consumables.
Yeah, okay. And there aren't any, besides the faculty and adjunct that are there aren't any other support staff, no administrative assistants or anything like there at Boston Rec. And so, about $187,000 generated over expenses at Boston Rec.
Kim, is Boston Rec, are the classes exclusively hospitality and culinary arts?
Yes.
Or do we have general ed classes taught there too?
No, I don't think there's any gen ed classes taught there. They take them at other sites or they take them online typically.
We don't have permission to deliver gen ed classes there. WSU Tech and WSU would not sign off on that.
Yeah, so it's all strictly the program classes. Yeah.
On the bottom here, what's other Wichita sites make up 350 credit hours? Is that like Indo-Chinese Center?
Yeah, I think so, if they're credit bearing. And Lori, do you know, or Kent, maybe, I think Kent, this is kind of a leftover from some of Kent's analysis. Those might be classes that are credit bearing that for some reason they're just kind of one-off things. Because we don't have any other site where we, permanent site where we teach anything. So.
Well, we offer some childcare courses or child development courses in the Wichita area at the TOPS location.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry.
There may be some one-offs here and there per request that we get that are programs that WSU or WSU Tech do not offer. And so we are sometimes allowed to do those in Sedgwick County.
Yeah.
But that asterisk means those expenses are included in the total expenses for Boston, right? Yeah, okay.
Yes, yeah. And then on the back side of your sheet is the Flint Hills, Council Grove and Marion. And the note at the top, I couldn't get it to fit or to stay on the bottom of that table. So Flint Hills sites include Council Grove, Center High School, Hillsboro, Marion, Peabody, and White City. And again, you'll see the credit hours separated out there. The revenue that's generated from tuition and fees, the state aid allocation. And again, revenues over expenses there, $105,000. And if you look at the information that Heather put together on Council Grove and Marion, the staffing and the enrollment is all combined together for those sites. It's not in our system. It's not split out by separate code, so it's combined it's just identified as Flint Hills. But you can see at Council Grove, we have a lease of $14,440 annually, utilities that cover electricity, gas, water, phone, internet, another $7,200. The faculty info and the enrollment is all included, coded to Flint Hills, and so it's at the very bottom there. Very little equipment cost during that year. Again, the staffing's down below. We'll talk about that in a second. Marion, we're at the high school, cost us $6,500 a year is all. $75 or $78 a month in phone. We used to be in Marion, we used to be in the big old Bound Corby building, I think, which was the old grade school, great big 3-story brick building. That just wasn't, fiscally feasible to be in there any longer. And so the first year I was here, we were getting ready to leave Marion, and they said, come to the high school, we'll pay basically to have you there. All you gotta do is pay for your internet. And so we have a space at Marion High School. And again, no equipment purchases there. There's administrative and student support staff there, but we reduced that by a 20-hour position in the last year. And so Flint Hills combined those sites together, and again, we have people that kind of go back and forth and support both of those sites. 67 sections taught, about $97,000 in faculty salaries, the enrollment, 602 enrollments. There's 2 full-time staff, 1 28-hour part-time, and 2 10-hour part-time at Marion and Council Grove. And Heather can answer more questions about those 2 sites. But again, the director for the Flint Hills goes back and forth between Council Grove and Marion. Pretty lean staff, but and like Lori said earlier, we Zoom some of the classes between Council Grove and Marion and those sites between other sites to try and create full classes if we have to.
Dr. Kroll?
Yes.
Can I make one more point back on I think the question that Shelby had about the EduCare teachers?
Sure.
The EduCare teachers were not part of the master agreement. They were referred to as teachers, but they were classified in our personnel system as ops staff people.
Okay,
and so they did not fall under the master agreement. And so we had no obligation to reassign those to another location. And we don't have another daycare facility. So those 2 groups of employees are not the same. And the EduCare teachers were not covered by the master agreement. I want to make sure you understand that.
Yeah, I get that. I get a little concerned when I see, about 65% of our budget is teachers and faculty. And with our master agreement, I don't know exactly what that entails, but it seems like even if we go down heavily in revenue, that percentage would just increase because those numbers aren't going anywhere. And at some point, we might have to cut some classes, which I assume we wouldn't have to keep all the teachers if we don't teach all the classes, but I'm still.
Well, the master agreement says we have to get rid of all adjuncts in a particular department before full-time positions are cut. And we rely pretty heavily on adjuncts in most departments.
How often do we renew the master agreement?
It is in force all the time until changes are negotiated. And so I want you to understand, we do reduce full-time positions. We have not filled full-time positions at times when they become vacant. And so those positions, primarily when somebody retires or resigns, we look at them and we decide, are we going to fill that full-time position? And that's when we decide to do that. So for this current fiscal year, we did not fill a philosophy position, a math position, and several others that left us. So we make those adjustments each year. as full-time positions become open.
Because if you're the, the healthcare, Blue Cross went up 600,000 for 393 teachers, and that's hard to keep up with.
We've, probably this year, it's not all faculty, but, I did a quick count in our budget reductions and in trying to, put a budget in front of you guys. I think there are just short of 50 positions that we have either kept open and not filled or eliminated as we go into this next budget year. And some of those, like Lori said, some of those are faculty positions, some of them are, positions kind of across the college. So we've worked really, really hard to scrutinize those really carefully and decide whether another position that absolutely has to be filled or not.
So I have a question.
Yes, please.
I think this might be for Lori. So if you are cutting the budget or trying to make reductions and save money, you're going to look at non-mutual agreement covered areas first, correct?
The master agreement,
Yes, non-master agreement covered areas first, such as
yes, that is very logical because it is not covered by the master agreement, and you can make those adjustments without having to follow the criteria in the master agreement for faculty. So we might cut off staff positions or.
and I understand attrition. We employed that practice throughout my career continuously, and levels of the economy would go up and down. But on the other hand, was there not a waiting list for Educare? I mean,
Not for all the grades.
There typically was a waiting list, but that meant, but oftentimes it was because the kids that were on the list needed to be in rooms that were already at capacity, that were full, the spaces were always full. So if they were on a waiting list, it was because those rooms were already full and they couldn't get in, so.
we didn't have the flexibility to change
No,
the
not according
rate of, according to the student population, like maybe.
Julie, I cannot hear you.
Maybe one year we had 6 classes of, I guess, 3-year-olds. And then the next year we only would have 1. So
It's all based on licensing standards and stuff.
I thought I recall Christie saying that there were some classes that there was a wait list for some, but not for others, and the wait list was sometimes longer than, like you said, there'd be some
Yeah.
that, there's a wait list, but there's no
space.
space for it,
Yeah.
and no ability to expand
Yeah.
within our license.
Hey, Lori, I had a quick question on, say at the bottom of Marion and Flint Hills, when you say there's 67 sections taught and 602 enrollments, are you talking about classes, and are we talking, I guess I'm trying to see how many students and credit hours are we talking about there?
Well, the credit hours are listed on your sheet here. Heather can talk about because you did the analysis on the Flint Hills stuff, Heather, right?
Yes. So I put enrollments because our report pulls every time. So there's multiple students that will take more than one class. So enrollments means there's 602 individual enrollments, but that's not 602 students because we would have to go back and.
That takes 4 classes, yeah. Say you have 100 to 150 students out there.
We would need to pull the individual head count for that site.
It just seems like a lot of stuff for 4 teachers or 5 teachers.
Seems like a lot of what?
A lot of enrollments and sections for only 5 teachers.
Well,
but it makes sense if it's that many credit hours.
Yeah.
And again, Amy in the Flint Hills area are really good about Zooming classes together. So she will Zoom because of just where they're located. There's students can't travel that far to go to a class at a certain building. And so she will use one instructor and Zoom 2 classes together. And she does that quite a bit.
Okay, that makes sense.
So some of those 67 sections may actually be taught as one section with two sections merged together.
So it sounds like from this, we need to come back with some additional information on McConnell expenses for you. That question hasn't been answered completely, so, right? And we'll do that. Okay. You want to spend some time now talking about the supplemental information and have Kent share some additional information about that? Laura, you've got those back 3 pages, right, of the.
Is it the same as what was in here?
It's the same as in there, but I didn't know if people would remember to bring their books or not, so.
I don't usually, but I did that.
Yeah, okay. I've got mine.
Is that from the July meeting?
It's the July 28th one, Shelby. It's got July 28th on it.
I'll pick that up.
It's pages 28, 27, 28, 29, and 30. So 20, yeah, 27 through 30. So it's the back pages that you have already. So we, and again, Kent and I kind of talked about this a little bit. Some of it was some of our thought was generated because of some of the questions that Shelby had last time about, you know, the audited, the dollars that showed up in the audit, the $2.9 million, and then the additional, you know, unencumbered cash that we had this year. And thought it was important to go back and try and explain that operating budget, our operating budget that we put in front of you folks, that you actually approve, that we, you know, we do our day-to-day operations from, is a subset of the audited budget. And so I asked Kent to spend a little bit of time, you know, kind of going back through and explaining that and, you know, answering questions if you've got them. So Kent, we'll turn it over to you. We can't hear you yet. Nope, can't hear you now. I can see you talking.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
You can.
Yes, can you hear us?
Yeah, not as well, but I can't hear you. So I'd like to start, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again with the audit. So I think you can see the audit here. And bear with me a little bit. I'm going to go down to the, so this is our most recent audit, and this is the table of contents. And we really have two types of financial statements in the audit. We have this front section that we call basic financial statements. And these are on what we call a full accrual basis of accounting. And I'll point out a few things on that in a minute. And then in the supplemental section, we have the different funds. And this is what we call the legal basis of accounting. And it's what you see in the legal budget that you're being asked to approve. And it's also in the same format that we show you the operating budget. So I'd like to go through that and just point out some of the differences and also show you how the operating budget ties into our total cash of the college. So if we go to page 11 or 12 here on the audit, okay. So this is our balance sheet on a full accrual basis. You can see things here in the assets like, well, we have bookstore inventory, we have receivables, we have, the big one is other capital assets. You know, there's 46 million, almost $45 million. That's the cost value of our property. The insurance or replacement cost value of that's much greater, 150 million or something like that. But these are the things on our balance sheet from a full standard that don't show up on the legal basis budget. And then
can I interrupt you for just a second? Can you increase the size of that? Blow it up just a
Yes.
little bit. My old eyes can't see it. I don't know about anybody else, but it's too tiny for me to see, so
Yeah, sorry, I should have asked about that.
a little bit more.
You can blow it up on his screen, that might help.
Yeah.
That better?
So, yeah, it's a little bit better. I'm gonna move these pictures out of the way a little bit for the. Can you do, are you doing full
There you
screen?
go.
There you go, that's better for us.
That's good.
Okay,
That's better, yep.
so also in our liabilities, we have our long-term debt here. We have this total OPEB liability, $6 million. And OPEB is other post-employment benefits. So that's like accrued sick leave and vacation and things like that. So I'm just want to point out that there's a lot of differences between the full accrual basis and the budgetary basis. And going on, this is our this is what we call this statement of revenues, expenses, and changes in net position. It's like an income statement. And I think this is going down here. And I think this is the figure that Shelby, you picked up on from the auditors, what they're talking about when they said that there was a $2.9 million increase in net position. So I just want to contrast that that's not the same as a change in unencumbered cash. So stop me if you have questions or want to discuss this.
This is Shelby. I guess maybe a better question for me last week to clarify was just instead of just unencumbered cash, what was our working capital? All our assets minus our liabilities may have been a better question for me to ask last week.
Yeah, I'm having a little trouble hearing you.
Working capital, he was wondering if maybe we could come up with a working capital.
I think that would have been a better question for me to ask you. Instead of just unencumbered cash would be, what was our working capital? May have been a better question for me to ask.
Yeah, working capital, we use the term unencumbered cash. Working capital, I think from an accounting standpoint is current assets minus current liabilities, which still is different than what we operate on because the legal basis is strictly unencumbered cash. We'll look at our cash and our fund balances in just a minute. Maybe it'll come clear into focus that way. I hope it does. I do want to on in the audit here over about page 50. I think this is page maybe 55. Yeah. This is our general fund in the audit. So back in the supplemental section, and this goes along, this is really very similar to what you see in the legal budget. Starts off with the fund balance from the prior year, and that's our unencumbered cash balance. When it says fund balance, that's the same thing as unencumbered cash. And we have our revenues, expenditures and encumbrances. The difference, the revenues over unencumbered, over expenditures, and then that gets added to the beginning unencumbered cash to give us the ending unencumbered cash for every year. So that's the way it's shown in the audit. Now I'd like to pull up the supplemental information. So are you seeing the supplemental information now on your screen?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to go back to the beginning of this. Dr. Kroll, I think, gave you some of the ending pages, which I'll get to in a second. I put the front part of this document, and I know you don't have it in front of you, but you might want to take some time to look at it when you get a chance. Here we show the different funds and how they come together. So we have the general, the PTE fund, the tech fund, adult basic ed, and so forth.
Shelby, you can do it, Shelby.
This one?
Is there a question?
What page are you on?
This is page 1 of the supplemental information.
There's a blue divider in that, it's behind the last.
I need to look it up. It's that. But I know what box.
Well, that's good. That's a start.
So what I wanted to point out here on the front part of the supplemental is we go through and we talk about the different funds, and our general fund, we have a lot of reserves and designations with our general fund. And this is on page 2 of the supplemental information, what I'm looking at right now. And so it talks about the operating portion of the general fund. And then we have these designated accounts, a technology fund, program development fund for academics, facilities fund. This is used mostly for like maintenance and deferred maintenance. And then we have the capital reserve. This was when we accumulated money for the big project at Andover. We had like $7 million of general fund money, $7 million of bond money. And so you can see at the beginning of 19, we had about 6.5 or 6.6 million into capital reserve. And at the end of 2019, or actually July 1, 2020, we're down to about 3.7. So that shows what's been spent out of this on the project at Andover. And then we have a lot of other funds. Now I'd like to skip back to the pages that Dr. Kroll has given you. I think it starts on 27. Yeah, 27.
Yes, that's correct, yeah.
Okay, so this is on this unencumbered cash basis, or what we call the legal basis, and this coincides with how the legal budget is put together under state statutes. And so our balance sheet under this method of accounting, there's really only 3 things. Our assets are totally cash and investments. And our liabilities are just our payables and our encumbrances. And that difference gives us the fund balances, or what we would call unencumbered cash. And I think maybe you could look at that as our working capital. If it helps, I think that would be a way of looking at that. And so let me just go to the next page. And this is where we detail out all our cash and investments. And you can see we have about 13.7 in investments, or yeah, 13,000,007 in investments, and then about a little over 9 million in bank balances, and a few $1,000s cash on hand. So we have about 23 million plus cash at the end of the year, or the beginning of the current year. As of June 30, 2020, this is what we had. And this is cash on the general ledger. So this would be like the reconcile balance, not wouldn't be exactly the balances if you looked at the bank statements. So that's our assets. Then our liabilities, we have encumbrances, payroll encumbrances. You can look at those. And we do have a couple of offsets that are prepaid, like our insurance. We have to pay our insurance since we moved the policy dates back to July 1. We have to make a great big payment before the end of the year. That's really for the 2020 year. So we did show that as a prepayment here. Anyway, this balance, 2,777,000,000 is taken from the cash balance to give us our total fund balances. And those fund balances are detailed on page 30. And so we have the operating portion of the general fund and the PTE fund. So that's 8,497,000. So I want to show you that number on a different form. That's actually our operating budget. So we have what we call the operating funds up here. And when we show you the operating budget, this is these are the funds that we're talking about, the operating portion of the general fund and the PTE fund, the tech fund. Then we have other funds, the student life, this is our bookstore, student union, food service, and residence hall. So that's the biggest dollar amount, and it is fairly substantial, 4 million. We do have to make sure we have money in there at the end of the year to buy inventory for the upcoming year in the bookstore. That's a big expenditure at the end of the year. We also have to have funds in there to make sure we can cover the facilities costs that go along with the residence halls and the student unions. So then, we have some other funds here. Here's that capital projects fund again. And these designated funds, we have a lot of designated accounts. These are really part of the general fund. And a lot of them are like fee accounts, course fees, where we keep money in there to make expenditures. And that way the departments are able to carry that money over. Whereas the departmental budgets are just year to year. And if there's excess money in a departmental budget, it does not carry over to the next year. So this was our total fund balance. And again, I'd like to switch over just to take a look at our operating budget, and this number will show up there also. So I'm going to click out of here. And pull up so this is a topic for action that's in the, can you see this, by the way?
Yeah, now we can. Well, that shows the operating budget number again.
Does it say topic of action?
That was it now, yeah. So,
okay.
increase the size again, please.
Okay, yeah. So what I wanted to show you here is on the operating budget.
Did you make that full screen for us?
I'm gonna have to reduce it a little bit though. Okay, so this is the operating budget for FY21 that we're asking you to approve next week. And I just wanted to show you a couple of figures. The beginning unencumbered cash balance here, this was the figure that was over on, I think it was page 28 or 20, 29, maybe 30.
It's page 30.
And let's see.
Is this the reduced mill? So I can go back to my budget book and compare it. What are the reductions?
Well, the reduced mill is going to show up in the legal budget.
This is
Um,
the budget.
So I guess that's the main thing I want to show you, that this is just that operating portion of the general fund plus the PTE fund, but that's the majority of our expenditures, and that's the main focus of our budgeting. So that's why we focus on what we call the operating budget here. So I hope that helps to tie in the overall cash to the unencumbered cash and what we look at for our operating budget. So I guess I'd stop there and see if there's any questions or comments.
It does show that change in revenue.
I think, this is Shelby, I think I had two questions for you. On page 30, it says capital projects fund. Is that part of our increase 1.89 mil for building funds? Is that part of that, or is that capital outlay fund below that?
That's the capital outlay fund is a mill levy fund. That capital project fund that shows up on page 30, that's actually part of the general fund. It's not what we consider to be part of the operating fund. It's a designated reserve of the general fund. And that's the portion that's obligated for the Simpson contract on the 5,000 building. So we'll spend that down this year.
And then this year, there is still another, like a 1.89 or something mil in the current budget, which was, that equates to about what, 1.5 million more revenue this year from taxes. So will that also go into that fund and be spent? I just don't know. Do we still have like $5 million worth of work to do?
No. So the money that's in the capital outlay fund goes to pay off the debt. There were bonds issued for the, the 5,000 building project was about 14 million. About 7 million of that came from the general fund reserve. The other 7 million came from bonds or COPs. And the capital outlay levy is paying off that debt. Now we will have money left over after the debt is paid off. Let me bring that supplemental information back
What
up.
kind of interest rate are we paying on that debt? Would it be smart just to pay it off at capital projects fund and not pay all that interest?
It's not very much. It's in the general fund, or in the, excuse me, in the legal budget here. Let me see if I can find that.
And I also had a tangent the other day. I was thinking about, is there any way we could separate out the Educare buildings and just take them off the insurance if we're not using them for a year?
They're not, I don't,
I assume the roofs and everything are covered this year, but I don't know if we're not, we could take the gamble of not insuring for a year, or even take it off the policy.
30%.
Or at this
It's
point.
only one building, right?
yeah,
At this point, they probably wouldn't
Out of
discuss
the
much
overall
anymore.
square footage of roof space, I don't know that it needs to be.
It's 9,300 square foot building, I think, or 8,300 or something like that, but. If that, well, I think, actually, I'd have to ask Lori, there's a classroom in that building, they may be using the classroom in that building this year for their.
There is a classroom and there's one faculty office still being used over there. And we still have to house all the equipment until we determine, how we're going to dispose of it through the grant requirements. I mean, it's not like it's emptied out and.
Okay.
still has 25 years worth of stuff in it.
Your house was this big?
More than 25. I keep hearing you every time I leave.
I just got
Told me?
okay.
Oh, no.
I know this is nothing what we're talking about right now, but I was also wondering, like, could we talk about like cross-country team? What does it cost us versus what does it make us? And do we need a cross-country team? And any of them
Do we-
from even from the state?
Do we want to to bring closure to this part of the supplemental, are we done with that section now?
Yeah, go ahead and finish up your part, Ken, and then we can.
I think I'm done with the presentation. Another thing, I don't know if you can see my screen now, but this is page 19 of the supplemental information. And it's got information on the capital outlay mill levy. So you might want to take a look at that if you have questions about that. And you can get back to us and we could answer those specifically. But we do estimate when it's paid off, right now, we have an excess balance of about 1.15 in there. We do think we're going to have to use some of that on the 100-200 building project that's going on right now, though. So it'll probably be less than that when it's all said and done. So
Yeah, this is for, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't interrupt you. Just,
Go ahead, Forrest.
can you bring up the sheet you had up there a little bit ago that had the updated operating budget that reflected the new revenues from the lower mill that we passed last week?
Yeah, and that would, you know, but
It's in here, it's in the one I'm getting. It's,
we don't have it in this.
His, when I looked at it, his was dated August 11th, I think, 2020, so his is.
I think this is what you're asking for, right?
If you want to just go ahead and hand me my book and then I can look at it. And then we're looking at this sheet.
It was Forrest, right, that was asking for this. Can you see it?
Yes, I can see it. Okay, thank you. So if I'm reading this right, Kent, what we passed on the mill last week is going to have us operating this year estimated at a $736,000 deficit, assuming revenues come in as expected and expenditures are as expected.
That's correct.
Okay.
I guess the other, if we're done with this part of the presentation, I go back to what I mentioned at the first. I know it's on, we want to get done by 7 and it's 6:45 now, but we just want to make sure that you have the information you need to approve a budget next Tuesday.
I assume we can email questions over the weekend if we have them.
Yeah, send it to me. I think, again, and I've got Jessica also, I think, Lance, you wanted to have a little bit of an update on enrollment. I think it's really important as we go into next week's meeting and, approve the legal budget and the operating budget. I think it's really important for people to understand that we, even next week, are not going to know what our enrollment is completely. There are still lots and lots of unknowns because the high schools are just starting to get back to where they are in their buildings and enrolling. Jessica will give us an update, but there are so many unknowns going into this next budget year. And so I'd really encourage you to think about that a lot as we pass the legal budget and the operating budget. Because there aren't very many safety nets right now for any of us. It doesn't feel like. So Jessica, do you want to do a little bit of an enrollment update?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Just wanted to let you know that as of this evening, when I ran the enrollment numbers, our head count currently sits at 5,957 students, and our credit hours are now 60,077. So we have enrolled quite a few students in the last 2 weeks since we've come back and are meeting face to face. We have, of course, been enrolling remotely as we've been working from home, but those students definitely want to see our faces and work with us in person. And our numbers definitely show that. Our new student enrollment is really strong. And when I say new student, I mean students who have never been to an institution before. So they're right out of high school and coming to Butler. And then as Dr. Kroll mentioned, our high school enrollment is behind compared to this time last year. We do still need to enroll about 600 students, and that should account for around 2,500 credit hours. And I know that high school partnerships and academies are working really closely with our high school partners in order to get students enrolled. But I think everyone just needs to understand that it's still a very fluid situation with our high school students because of their start dates are very different than ours. And we're just trying to get them in the classes that they need to take.
We probably won't know because of the September start dates, the 8th and 9th, that they're, some of those high schools are starting. We just kind of keep telling people we'll know what our enrollment is September 9th, We'll have a clearer picture then.
Got enrolled today.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't have it.
Well, there'll be plenty of them that'll
They're
enroll
still
the week
juggling with
before.
it.
Yeah. And we'll also, and Heather can talk about this too, or Jessica can too, that there'll still be students that will enroll. For instance, if they come to us and aren't enrolled when classes start next week and are late, then we'll be enrolling them in 12-week classes and some of those later start sections of classes. And so it's kind of a moving target when it comes to enrollment. So Heather, do you know anything more about the high school enrollments?
I just wanted to share, like Jessica said, we are quite a bit behind from where we normally are at this time because we normally are in the high school building enrolling those students in the spring. So our staff were not able to do that because everyone was working and learning remotely. We are gaining ground on that, but even Monday morning, we had an entire high school who had not enrolled a single student. So we anticipate significant enrollment in the next week or so.
And I will mention that we are open this Saturday from 10 to 3 in Andover and in El Dorado. I imagine we're going to be very busy. Our students, unfortunately, they like to wait to the last minute. And so, we want them to come. We don't care that they're waiting to the last minute, but that's what happens sometimes. And it does make it a little difficult to plan.
If I could ask a couple questions. When is your end date enrollment for high school?
I'm sorry, the end date?
End date enrollment for high school.
The college has a policy that we try to, for the student success, not to enroll them past the first week of classes. So for the high school students though, we have varying start dates at those schools because like Dr. Kroll said, some of them are starting in a couple weeks. Some of them don't start until September 8th or 9th. So it's not one solid date. We work with each student individually. And but typically we try for their success not to enroll them after the first week of class.
Okay,
I would also add that we're doing some 9-week classes at some of the high schools to better fit their needs. And so some of those classes, if they're a second 9 weeks, won't even start till October. So you could have students enrolling through mid to 2/3 of the way through October. There's not one date that you can point to.
Okay, I understand enrollment's down in the high school areas, but could you tell us where enrollment is?
I'm sorry, I missed the end of that. Could we tell you where what?
Could you tell us where enrollment was at this time last year?
We're down around 11% compared to this time last year.
Okay, do you attribute that entirely to the high school?
Not entirely.
Okay, would you be able to tell me what percent of high school enrollment being off and what percent might be regular enrollment?
Continuing students is down a little bit. So those would be the students that had been at Butler previously. That would be down head count wise, approximately 13%.
Okay, so if you have 5,957 enrolled already, what was the number last year at this time? Do you know?
Last year at this time,
Yeah, just trying to get a feel. You know, I understand all about COVID and all that. I understand delays in the high school, and in fact, I'm really irritated at Rose Hill for not opening up before September, but that's just the way it is with some schools. So I understand your dilemma. I'm just trying to compare it somehow to last year's enrollment.
sure. So last year at this time, our unduplicated headcount was 6,819.
I think, Jessica, you said earlier today that one of the areas where we're seeing significant changes in new students, right? And some of those are identifying that they had planned to go to KU or K-State or someplace, but they decided that they're gonna enroll full-time here to save money, and because they don't know, you know, those classes, a lot of those classes are gonna end up being online. And,
That is correct. We hear it multiple times a day. Students are telling us that I was going to go to a university, and then they announced they're switching their classes to online, and you know they're not willing to pay the university prices for the online experience. So they're choosing to come to Butler.
And about how many would you say? 100, 200, 300?
Oh, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. But I mean, we hear it multiple times a day.
I can share with the high school enrollment. Last fall, we had just under 1,500 high school students taking classes. And right now we have just over 800 enrolled. So lots of enrollment yet to go.
okay, we're just a few minutes short of 7 o'clock. We said we'd be done by 7. Any other final questions before we say thanks for everybody's time and energy and for being here? Nothing? Anything from you guys?
I think we're good.
Mary Martha, anything from your end? Good? Lance? You're muted, but it sounds like everything's okay, right? Okay. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Lori and Kent, Jessica, Bill, Heather, everybody else. Appreciate it. I'll see some of you tomorrow.
Have a good evening.
Thank you. Yeah.